Hello, I'm Rick Steele, and I serve as chair of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic media. Richard Nobles.
Present.
Jonna Norton.
Here.
Abby Callis. Jessica Hamilton. I see you. I see Jessica's waving. She's here.
Hey.
Hey.
Here.
Okay. Tiffany Johnson.
Here.
Janine Kesterson. Rodney McNeil. Zach Parrott.
Here.
And Doug Wright. I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
And Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting, as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to the meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended, so we'll be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On August 23rd, 2022, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials were posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line "request for the agenda," and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allow members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240. But as we are currently after hours, for documentation purposes, please rather send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call before we began, and there's no one currently on the conference call, but if I hear someone enter the conference call, I will let you know.
Thank you, David. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda, which is agenda approval. I believe you all received the materials that David sent out, or Leslie sent out earlier this week, maybe yesterday. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
And Rick, I would have one other item to add to the agenda.
That's true.
If that's okay with you and the members of the
Yes.
committee. There was a discussion topic at the last board meeting that involved the topic of practitioners' responsibility for clients who are in crisis after hours. And as that relates to the unprofessional conduct regulations, or whether the BSRB should have some direction on that topic. And so if it's okay, I'd like to add that as an item under the new business for the agenda that was sent out, I believe, on Thursday or Friday of last week.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as revised?
This John.
I move
Make
to
that
approve.
motion.
Well, you can just take your pick, David. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tiffany. All in favor of approving the amended agenda, signify. Okay, it looks like all in favor. Any opposed? Just for clarity. Okay, agenda is approved. The next item on the agenda is review and approval of the minutes from the two previous advisory committee meetings, one on June 14th, 2022, and one on August 2nd, 2022. You'll recall we didn't have quorum in the August meeting, so we were not able to approve the minutes from June. So hopefully you've had a chance to look over those. And we can do them one at a time. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from June 14th?
Motion to approve those minutes from June 14th.
Okay, thank you, Zach. Is there a second?
I can second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or corrections or anything? Okay, if there's no discussion, then all in favor of approving the June 14th minutes, please indicate that. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay. So August 2nd, we had David, that's correct that we would still approve minutes, though there wasn't any official, there were no votes taken, but we still approve the minutes. Is that correct?
Yes, approving the minutes is just approving that there was a record from that meeting and what was discussed. If there's not a quorum, there can't be official action taken by the advisory committee, but there still can be discussion and information out there as far as some of those conversations and discussions can occur. So
Sure.
There's still a record from that meeting on the 2nd.
Okay. So Tiffany, it looks like it may be between you and me. Because I'm not sure that I think it was us and just a couple others there. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
On the meeting on the 2nd, it was you, Rick, Abby Callis, Tiffany Johnson, Janine
Mhm.
Kesterson, and Doug Wright.
right. So Tiffany, if those minutes look correct to you, if you want to, not sure if I can move, can the chair? Sure.
There's no rule that says the chair can't make a motion or second a motion, so.
Okay,
I'll go ahead and move. I didn't have my mic on. I'll move
Okay.
to approve the minutes from June 14th.
okay. And I will second. And all in favor of approving those minutes? Aye. 2, 3. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay. Okay. Minutes have been approved. So next on the agenda is Executive Director's report. So I'll let David take that away.
Thank you, Rick. I have a few agency updates as well as some updates from the last board meeting on September 12th, and then some legislative updates on some different committees that are meeting currently. First, for some legislative BSRB agency updates. We are still under some of the governor's direction as it relates to the pandemic in terms of avoiding in-person meetings in state office buildings unless we can sufficiently space individuals. And given the size of some of our advisory committees and board membership, that's difficult to do at the BSRB office. So we will be checking with the governor's office if we receive further direction on that or if that changes. But for the foreseeable future, we'll continue to have mostly in remote advisory committee meetings or possibly a hybrid meeting if we want to have some in person and some remote. Additionally, I wanted to let all the members of the advisory committee know by statute, every agency submits a budget. The BSRB submitted a budget by the statutory deadline of September 15th. That is currently in the process of being reviewed by the division of the budget, which assists the governor's office. And then the governor's office will review those budget submissions We had to make adjustments for the current year, which is fiscal year 2023, as well as put in a budget request for the next 2 years, fiscal year 2024 and 2025. And so recommendations on that budget from the governor's office generally come out the first week in January, and then the legislature can make further adjustments during the legislative session that happens in the spring. So in terms of some updates from the board meeting that occurred September 12th, 2022, the board did have a few different presenters discuss some different information before the board. There was a presenter from a company that's called CE Broker, which provided information to the board on an alternate method for handling audits of continuing education. This company contracts with different licensing boards in different states, and what it does is it allows licensees to upload their continuing education directly to a portal, and then it works with states to determine their specific requirements for continuing education. And then when individuals are selected for audit at the time of renewal, you can either use the documents that are already loaded to that portal to handle those audits in an expedited manner, or you can have individuals upload them at the same time. It has some really interesting features, and so I would encourage anyone who is interested in that to go back and watch that portion of the board meeting. The board did not have a discussion on that or reach a decision, but it is some interesting information for the board to consider in terms of another way of handling the audit process for continuing education. Additionally, the board heard from a representative from Heart of America Professional Network. Heart of America Professional Network, which provides impaired provider programs for different groups. And what these programs do for some licensing boards, they provide assistance with disciplinary actions. And so if you have a professional who has unprofessional conduct, let's say, but the professional also is suffering from issues related to substance use or is having mental health concerns, this impaired provider program can work with the board and could be an alternative to some forms of discipline, or for other entities, they set up an impaired provider program where licensees are able to voluntarily submit themselves to the direction of the impaired provider program to get assistance so that they can recover and then begin to practice again. And so some interesting ideas were brought forward by this presenter. There are some other entities here in Kansas that have similar programs that I'm currently researching. And then there are some in other states that have programs set up for this purpose. And so I think the board may have discussions on that topic in the future. Additionally, the board has a primary responsibility to regulate the profession by licensing professionals, but it also is charged with the responsibility to investigate complaints against practitioners. And the board has an investigation policy to guide their work in that area. The board is currently in the process of reviewing and modifying the investigation policy, which guides the work of the Complaint Review Committee, made up of a subset of board members. It is anticipated that at the next full board meeting in November, the board may go ahead and complete their revisions to this investigation policy, and then an updated policy will be posted to the board's website. Additionally, once a year, the board attempts to hold an off-site planning meeting. That's usually an all-day meeting to discuss topics that are relative to any kind of legislative agenda for the board. And the board recently chose to have an off-site planning meeting in person in Olathe on Monday, October 24th, 2022. And more information about that off-site planning meeting is on the board's website. If you go under the selection that has information on board's meetings, and there's an address for that location, but it should be an all-day meeting, and the agenda for that meeting should be released probably in about a week, so individuals can prepare for that meeting. In terms of some legislative updates, so currently the legislature is not in session. Usually in Kansas, the legislature meets just during the spring, sometimes close to about the end of April or May. During the interim, certain committees meet and deal with certain topics. Recently, there was an interim committee that is the Robert G. Bob Bethel Joint Committee on Home and Community-Based Services and Can Care Oversight. And that committee met on September 27th and asked me to present information to that committee. The last 2 years, there's been a special committee on mental health modernization and reform. That is not meeting this fall, but there were some recommendations from the committee that met the last 2 years. And they asked several agencies to provide any updates to speak about any topics that might be relevant to those recommendations. And so representatives from KDADS, the Kansas Department for Age and Disability Services, KDHE, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and Department for Children and Families, or DCF, and a few others, Department of Education, Department of Corrections, were all presenting some information, and they asked me to come forward on behalf of the BSRB. And I shared some of the work that the board has done in terms of workforce and licensing changes, and also looking at current discussions about unprofessional conduct, especially as it can relate to telehealth standards or any topic like that. And so I think that information was well received. Additionally, on October 18th, I'll be speaking to a joint committee on administrative rules and regulations that will be concerning some regulatory changes that have been recommended by the board. And those mostly relate to legislation that passed during the 2021 legislative session on supervision, but there's a handful of other changes in that group of regulations to be changed. Those proposed changes are on the BSRB website under proposed regulations. And there's also information on the front page of the BSRB. There will be a public hearing for those regulations at the BSRB office on Tuesday, November 8th from 10 a.m. until 11 a.m. That is generally an open meeting to collect additional feedback from any interested individuals wishing to provide comment on those proposed rule changes. Additionally, there's also an advertisement that we put into the Secretary of State's publication, and it provides information on ways to submit written comments if individuals want to submit written comments on those proposed regulation changes as well. So with that, I will end my report, and I can answer any questions from advisory committee members.
David, I just had one question. You know, I always ask budget questions. So I know that that's a fun time for you, having to get the 2-year budget up and ready to go in September. Several years ago, we decreased fees in a couple of key categories with the thought that we had carry forward balances that were continuing and accelerating. It seemed like when we decreased the fees, are we still doing okay with the current fee structure in keeping what we're trying to keep at least a 6-month reserve, right?
Well, so we have one fund for the agency. That's the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board Fee Fund. And there's currently a balance of about $2 million in the fund. Each year we have expenditures of about $1 million, and we have revenue that's coming in currently right around that amount too. We are operating at a slight deficit, and we expect to be spending more money here in the future, but in the short term, we should be fine. Our fee fund balance should go down slowly, though we are looking at ways to have savings if we can. During the pandemic, especially, we had some savings through, fewer reimbursements for travel and things like that. Additionally, we are members of different associations, and we contribute dues to be able to use some of their standardized tests and things like that. But we're expected to have representatives at those annual meetings to take information back to the board and to vote on important measures. I've been asked to speak at a number of those meetings this year, and when they ask you to speak, they tend to waive some of those fees. So if they ever ask me to speak on behalf of the board, I'm happy to do that and save the board a little bit of money in that process too. But we do operate at a slight deficit each year. And if we see additional cost from some of the individuals that we contract with, or some of the groups that we contract with for things like our licensing system or legal services, that could mean that we would need to reevaluate our fees more quickly than we expect. But at least I would say in the next 5 years, I don't think we'll need to make any significant changes unless things change dramatically in terms of our revenue. There are currently some multi-state compacts that are being discussed. There's one for professional counseling that's being discussed, and we're still getting some details on how that would allow states to collect revenue if they are a member of that compact. Additionally, there's a social work compact that the draft language was just released for, and it's unclear exactly how the revenue stream would change for that, because under that would propose a multi-state license. So it would change some of the ways. We have a number of out-of-state licensees, and so we would be charging a multi-state license for anybody who wanted it here to practice in other states, but we would also lose out on the revenue from individuals from other states wanting a Kansas license if they're part of the compact. So there's a lot of factors in play, but long story short, for the foreseeable future in the next 5 years, we should be fine unless something dramatic happens with those revenue streams. It should also be mentioned too, we are still seeing a slight growth in our number of licensees. So as long as our number of licensees continues to increase, that should help us out and make us more financially stable as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just briefly, you mentioned the committee on the Rules and Regs Committee. That's the committee that one of the reasons we're going through our unprofessional conduct is to make sure that we are updating our regulations. Is that something that you've reported to them? Because I know that there's been some legislative interest in sunsetting some of the regulations. Is that committee, or is that a different thing?
It's a little bit different. So when we adjust statutes, those have to be changes in law. And so those have to be passed by the legislature and then signed into law by the governor. Under the umbrella that the statutes provide to us, we're able to modify regulations to really flush out some of the details and some of the, so the statutes provide the overall framework of our jurisdiction, and then the regulations provide more detail on things within the statutory authority. So the legislature's authority to change the statutes. Right now, the regulations, the legislature is involved by us bringing forward that information to the committee and presenting and explaining the different changes. And then that hearing is also open if individuals want to provide comments to the legislative committee about our proposed regulation changes as well. But they really don't vote to approve the regulations. It's really more of an opportunity for a hearing versus taking action on them.
Okay.
And as far as what you mentioned in terms of sunsetting, that's really a little bit different. There have been some bills that have come before the legislature, and they've said that some agencies may not be reviewing their regulations in a timely manner, and there may be outdated information that needs to be revised. And so there have been some, I would say, big steps that have been proposed in those bills, but the bills have not passed. There's just been discussions about doing some big changes to the regulatory process. But I think that's one of the reasons why I've asked a lot of the advisory committees this year to review their regulations and make sure that we're being responsible about updating that language. If there's things to be removed, we're removing those or recommending their removal. Because the advisory committee's authority is really to do recommendations for the board to consider. But I appreciate all the work that the advisory committee has done this year looking at the regulations, because I think it helps me when I go talk to those committees. I can say that the board and the advisory committees are being responsive to that call, and also we're being good stewards of those regulations for the professions.
Okay. Any other questions about the executive director report? If not, then we will move on to old business. The first item of which is an update on our Scipact Commission, and that would also be David.
Okay. And as you might recall, there was a bill that passed last year, Senate Bill 170. And under that bill, Kansas was added to a multi-state compact for licensed psychologists. That it was called Scipact. It's a longer name, but really it's referred to generally as Scipact. And under that licensed psychology multi-state compact, licensed psychologists in Kansas are able to apply to the Scipact Commission for authority to provide either telehealth services in other compact states, or to apply to do a limited number of in-state days of practice in other compact states. But they apply directly to the Scipact Commission, and the Scipact Commission works with us as a licensing board here in Kansas. And they use some of our resources in terms of verifications, but we work with them to make sure that that is facilitated. And then for other states that are part of the compact, if they are a member of the compact, they are able to practice telehealth in Kansas as long as they have authority under the Scipact Commission or a limited number of days of in-state practice. And so one of the documents that you received in your materials for the meeting is the Scipact Commission newsletter for the third quarter of calendar year 2022. It includes a little bit of information about the different representatives from the different compact states and the number of states that are now part of the compact. I'm not going to go through all the information in the newsletter, but one of the interesting items is on the last couple pages, page 5 I guess the last three, page 5, 6, and 7, it does show quarter by quarter growth in compact states for the number of individuals that are practicing under Scipact. In Scipact, you have to identify a state as your home state. So they track it based on number of individuals who identify the state as their home state and are practicing under Scipact authority. So for Kansas, there were 39 individuals who began to practice under Scipact for telehealth services the first quarter, and then 11 other individuals became a member of Scipact the second quarter, and then the third quarter, 18 individuals, and then that smaller number you see is the individuals providing limited number of days of in-state practice, and that was 4, 0, and 3. And so you can see that the number has been growing per quarter, but after the initial first quarter growth, it's kind of been a smaller number of individuals. In terms of the number of individuals who are practicing in Kansas, that's a lot more difficult to track because once you're a member of Scipact and you are receiving authority to practice, you can practice in the different states and you don't have to indicate which states you're practicing in. So there are probably individuals in lots of states under Scipact that are practicing in Kansas, but we can only really track the individuals who have identified Kansas as their home state. I did want to mention too, there was a mid-year meeting for Scipact. There were some proposed rule changes that were open for public comment that I mentioned at the last advisory committee meeting. Those involved some authority to charge a renewal fee for individuals who are practicing under Scipact. There is an annual meeting that is scheduled for November 17th, 2022. I think earlier this spring or last year, I think it was last year in the fall, the board selected me to be Scipact Commissioner for Kansas. So I'll be attending that meeting on November 17th, or else I'll have a delegate attend the meeting to represent Kansas at that meeting. And so that's coming up here on November 17th.
Any questions about Scipact for David?
I have a quick question. With respect to renewal fees, the initiation or the membership fee for a licensee upfront is, if I'm remembering, isn't it like $400?
And I'd have to go back and look at that amount, but it could be that amount.
Okay. Has there been any preliminary discussion around what Scipact would charge for renewal of membership for a licensee? Has there been from their level? Has there been anything that you have been made aware of in terms of a proposed amount?
You know, I don't recall. There's been a lot of conversation on the amount of the renewal fee. Most of the conversation that I have heard, so currently Scipact does a state assessment. And so one of their ways of funding Scipact is they look to see how many individuals are practicing in different states. And then at the end of the year, they will assess a $10 fee per person to the state where they're practicing, where their home state is, if they're underneath Scipact. And so I think one of the things they talked about was they wanted to charge some sort of a renewal fee to move towards evaluating if they should remove that assessment to the state. They have not said it's guaranteeing that if they get the authority to do the renewal, that they will use it to replace that. But that is something that's been part of the discussion to get the renewal fee. But I don't remember the discussion on the amounts of the renewal under that. But I can check and see now that they've closed the comment period and see if maybe they've started to have conversations on those amounts for the renewal fee.
Thank you.
I just opened that up and it looks like you're right, Richard, the e-passport initial fee is $400. And they have listed here the annual renewal is $100. So
Substantially lower.
substantially lower, yeah. And then there's a in addition to that, looks like there's the interjurisdictional practice certificate that allows, I believe, temporary in-person And that's another, it looks like it's an additional $200 initially and with a $50 renewal fee. So it's a substantial, investment initially, but I guess the renewal is a lot less expensive.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too, we do the 2-year license cycle. So we have a license fee and a renewal fee, but it comes into play every couple of years. Whereas the Scipact, they work on a 1-year basis. And so those assessments to the state, and then the other things are on a calendar year each year. So.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. Other questions about Scipact? Okay, so we'll move on to old business 5B, which is continued discussion of unprofessional conduct regulations. So for those of you who have been with us for a while, we've been doing this for the better part of 2022, I think. We've been going through 2 specific regulations. The first one is 102-1-10A, which is the general unprofessional conduct regulation. It's got about 18 well, are they paragraphs or are they subsections, David? They're one of the 2.
Yeah, I would say probably subsections.
Subsections, okay. So they go through A through P, and we have successfully made it according to my records, we've successfully made it all the way down to K. So I've got my notes here that says we need to start at section K. The other unprofessional conduct regulation is 102-1-20, which is unprofessional conduct specifically regarding record keeping. And I believe we started with that one. So we had some comments and some regulation or comments and maybe recommendations. Previously, that would have been back in, I guess, April, maybe February. I know it was before June. That's all I know. So the process is we're going through these and identifying areas where our regulations maybe have not kept up with technology or with just kind of our general feelings about how we protect the public and what we would consider unprofessional conduct. And we will get to the end of this, and then we will make recommendations. We can make recommendations to the board to modify or update those regulations. And of course, the board is what will do that, right? So we can make recommendations to the board, but the board will be the one who has to do that. So we are at K, which is violation of applicable law. And you'll notice if you've got these up on your screen or maybe printed out, there you go. Thank you, David. Lovely. You'll notice that there's the K followed by big numerals, Arabic numerals, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then that's an L, not a 1. So we're going to focus on if you focus on the little letters, lowercase letters, for the heading, and then below that is what identifies the specific behaviors that are considered unprofessional conduct. So our first one is violating applicable law, which will include the following acts: impersonating another person, holding a license issued by this or any other board, claiming or using any method of treatment or diagnostic technique that the licensed psychologist refuses to divulge to the board. And I am inserting there that I assume that would be during the course of an investigation, perhaps by the Complaint Review Committee. I can't really think of another time when the board would be asking to divulge that kind of information. And then 3, refusing to cooperate with an investigation, and they define that. And then 4, being convicted of a crime resulting from or relating to the licensee's professional practice of psychology. And that might include fraud, or it might include any other crime that would be able to be prosecuted while someone's being a psychologist. one of the things to note with this is that these specifically violating applicable law here is applicable law related to mental health practice, right? So it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily talking about tax fraud, although if you did that in the context of your professional practice, it would be included here. I don't believe we're talking specifically about any violation of law, state law.
Rick, I wanted to let you know Janine Kesterson entered the meeting, so
Oh,
she's
great. Welcome, Janine.
Is he supposed to respond?
Any comments or questions or thoughts about K, violating applicable law? Okay. Then we can move down to.
I have a quick
Oh,
question.
go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't see your.
Oh, no. I just popped into my head. So under K3, the sentence, any psychologist taking longer than 30 days. I'm wondering, given the age of technology that we are in, and given when this statute was, or given when this regulation was written, is 30 days, is that a number that would be one that we would want to discuss as being timely, given advances in technology? Would we say that is too long, or would we want to say that might in fact be not long enough, given how things can be delayed technologically?
Well, I think that's a good question. I don't actually have a lot of direct experience to answer that question for you. I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing I would, oh, go ahead, Rick.
I'm just off the cuff, my initial thought was, okay, so if I am under investigation, it's possible that I'm going to have to collect records. It may be that I need to retain an attorney. And in order to meet with that attorney, right? So if I can't get in with my attorney in the next, I don't necessarily think it's too short, because I'm trying to imagine all the things that would need to happen, right? So, and that's the first one that comes to mind. I'm happy to say I haven't been in this situation, so I don't really know what all I would have to do. But I imagine I would, in fact, retain an attorney, and that may take a little bit of time. David, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
That's okay. I just wanted to point out, in terms of what may have been in the thought process when this regulation was created, I did want to say this entire set of regulations, the last time it was updated was 2004, January of 2004. So anytime before that, I think the first implementation was around 2000 for this set. So sometime between 2000 and 2004 is when a lot of this language came into being.
Okay.
Also, it is my understanding, this is Leslie, that if someone was sent, if there was a complaint against someone and they were sent the information, this means they didn't comply at all. They can contact the board and request an extension to submit their response if they have an attorney, or even if they don't.
Sure.
But they have to be in contact with the board.
And the other thing that strikes me is the mandate here is that the psychologist shall have the burden of demonstrating that the psychologist has acted in a timely manner. So if I were to receive a notice of complaint and I'm on a 2-month cruise, let's say, which would be lovely and not something I've done, but if that were to happen, it would be my burden to demonstrate that I acted in an as timely manner as possible, right? So if I were, I think between what Leslie just said and that, it's not unreasonable that a psychologist would respond within 30 days.
Yeah, no, that, yes, that makes sense. Yeah, I agree with that.
Janine, did you say something? I may have cut you off earlier.
Nope, I
Nope,
did
I'm
not
sorry.
have my mic muted, sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Well, and I should add too, since I'm sharing my screen, I'm not really able to see everyone's hands. So if you raise your hand, probably not going to be able to see most of you. So if you do have a comment, feel free to just kind of vocalize it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that gets us to L, which is aiding an illegal practice. And there's actually quite a few on this one. So you'll notice that there's enumerated 1 through 5, and then below number 5 is A through E. Okay, so if you start with number 1, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all discrete. Number 5 has 5 parts below it, A through E. So starting at the top, knowingly allowing another person to use one's license. I know that on the website, there is an example of someone who was disciplined for that one. I use that example in my ethics class periodically because it's an interesting one. Knowingly aiding or abetting anyone who is not credentialed by the board to represent that individual as a person credentialed by the board. Furthering the licensure or registration application of another person who is known or reasonably believed to be unqualified in respect to character, education, or other relevant eligibility requirements. That one to me seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, or anyone, Leslie or anyone, that would be, would that include me serving as a reference, knowingly serving as a reference to someone who is unqualified and me choosing to not recognize that?
So I think one of the interesting things, the way that the regulations are written provides some openness in terms of how these are defined. And what would happen is that if someone thought that did fall under this regulation, they could do a report of alleged violation alleging that was something inappropriate based on these regulations. And then it would be up to the 5 members of the board and the complaint review committee to weigh different factors to see if they believe that, and taking into account your response and any other information as far as whether it was a violation. So that's why we really can't give opinions in terms of what would constitute a violation a lot of the time, because it's really, a lot of these are fact-based, and it's really a conversation by the professionals that serve on the board and the public members. So that's why there's some openness, and it's hard to really point to one specific scenario and say that would be a violation unless
Okay.
you have more details. So.
Got it. Number 4 is making materially false statement or failing to disclose a material fact in an application or renewal of licensure. And number 5, failing to notify the board within a reasonable amount of time that any of the following conditions apply to the psychologist, or that the psychologist has knowledge not obtained in the context of confidentiality, that any of the following conditions apply to another professional regulated by the board. And that includes knowing that a licensee has had a license, etc., restricted, suspended, or revoked. The licensee has been subject to disciplinary action. The licensee has been terminated or suspended from employment or some form of, can you roll forward here? Okay. Misfeasance, malfeasance, or nonfeasance. D, a licensee has been convicted of a felony, or a licensee has practiced in violation of the laws or regulations regulating the profession. Okay, so that gets us. So all of those A through E are failing to notify the board within a reasonable amount of time, any of those things. David, does the sentence that follows E, a psychologist taking longer than 30 days to notify the board shall have the burden of demonstrating that the psychologist acted within a reasonable period of time, that goes with 5?
I believe it does, because number 5 is all about failing to notify the board of some of those
Right,
different
within that reasonable amount of time, and that defines reasonable amount of time.
Mhm.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Kind of bookends that section.
Yeah, it looks a little strange because it's separated from the different items, but I think it does go with those 5.
Any comments or thoughts about this L, aiding an illegal practice with its various points?
And Rick, the only comment that I would have on this one, and it's something we'll probably run by legal counsel just to make sure. But under L2, it says knowingly aiding or abetting anyone who is not credentialed by the board to represent
Oh,
an individual
yeah.
as a person credentialed by the board. And I know that the term credentialed could have different meanings. We license individuals, whereas credentialing could involve more like insurance, but it
Right.
may be a broader definition of credentialed. So we probably will have legal take a look at that term. So
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. Yeah, because if down in 5A, it's a little bit more specific, right? Has a license, certificate, permit, registration, or certificate.
mhm.
So this might need to read not credentialed, licensed, certified, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
some of it is just kind of trying to clear up any kind of ambiguities and trying to remove any kind of vagueness or clarify things. Because as I did mention, these were last modified about 18 years ago. So some of the understanding of these definitions may be a little different.
Great. Any other comments on L? Go ahead, Richard.
Does the final sentence that you were referencing, Rick, could that be taken as a way to grant an exception for not notifying the board in an event that a psychologist or a licensee found out that another licensee has engaged, for example, in that there's a felony on board in another life for another licensee? Could that be construed as making an exception for the licensee to not report?
I don't know about the exception part of that. The way I take it, so if I have, your automatic lights aren't working for you tonight, David. You don't
Please
move
change-
enough. You need to
Change
wait
after hours, yeah.
The way I take that is that if I am aware that a psychologist has a felony that's not been disclosed, and I don't disclose within 30 days, the burden is on me to demonstrate why that is still acting within a reasonable period of time. Right. So if you're going to come, so if I know that my office mate has been convicted of a felony and I do nothing about that, and Richard, you find out about that and you report me for failing to report, right? It's then my responsibility to tell the board, if I report within 30 days, that's all fine and good. If I have failed to report and it's beyond 30 days, it's my job to explain to the CRC why more than 30 days was not reasonable, right? Or was reasonable, I would say, right?
Yeah, that's my thought about it too. I'm wondering if anyone would think that it could be construed in any way as granting an exception for not reporting. I don't think that it's written as such, but I'm wondering if it could be twisted as such.
Well, I don't know. I mean, people are pretty good at twisting things, aren't they?
Yes.
Do you want us to maybe make a note? Because I think David's been keeping up a list of things we want to either visit with our attorney about or visit with the board about once we get to the end of this process. You want us just to make a note on that one and ask that question?
Maybe a short note on
Yeah.
one.
Okay.
Okay.
I've got a note down there. David, have you got that?
I do. Yep.
Excellent. Any other on L? Got good news. M is going to be very short for us because M just references KAR 102-1-20. So those of you who might not have been on the committee when we took care of that regulation, there was some discussion about whether that regulation as the whole thing ought to be just picked up and inserted right here. Right. So the way it currently is, it just says failing to maintain and retain records as outlined in KAR 102-1-20. There was some discussion about why do we have unprofessional record keeping separate from unprofessional everything else. That's been a long time, David. Did we have a good answer for why that existed? Was there a reason?
No, but I believe that there was a recommendation to go ahead and combine it. And
Yeah.
at least one of the other advisory committees had a recommendation that was the same. And I looked to see if there would be any issues with potentially other regulations that might be referencing that regulation. And it didn't appear to be an issue with that. So, but I'm not sure why they were split out separately.
Yeah, that's one of those quirky things. You just wonder, there was a reason.
Yeah. And I did hear a couple beeps on the conference call. If there's something on the conference call, could you go ahead and identify yourself? Okay, maybe they dropped off, but if you're on the conference call, go ahead and state your name. If not, we can move on, but. Okay, guess we can move on.
Okay. N, improperly engaging in research with human subjects, which shall include the following acts: failing to consider carefully the possible consequences for human beings participating in the research, failing to protect each participant from unwarranted physical and mental harm, failing to ascertain that the consent of the participant is voluntary and informed, and failing to preserve the privacy and protecting the anonymity of the subjects within the terms of informed consent. This is an interesting one to me because I generally think of the research end of, I do this. And I usually think of my institutional review board as the one who takes care of making sure that I'm complying here. And it's interesting that we have it in here. It's good that we have it in here as well. I don't know what to do about this. The number one, failing to consider carefully the possible consequences. I have that underlined and a little frowny face there because I'm trying to imagine the complaint review committee determining whether I carefully considered the possible consequences, right? That's something, I don't know if that's knowable, right? I wish this one was a little more behavioral because it's asking the complaint review committee to get in my head in a way that I don't know that they can, right? Did I consider it or was I just negligent, right? Did I act in a way that, you see where I'm going with that? I don't like the regulation of intent, right? Or that I didn't carefully
This becomes thorny too. I totally hear what you're saying, Rick. And this also becomes thorny in the instance where, say you have an R01 or something, you have a research grant, and it goes through IRB, it passes IRB, you get a complaint from a research subject, it goes through the university, it goes through KU, and they launch a complaint with us, with the BSRB, and there are two parallel lines of complaints going on. Your IRB complaint is managed in one way, we're doing it a whole different way. And the clearance initially was through your IRB at KU. And it was ascertained that the way in which you had conceptualized the project was all square. I do see the issue that you're talking about here, because the intent, at least as it was conceptualized, was already thought to be all square when you proposed it with the IRB at KU.
Right. And I wonder, so as I'm thinking through this, so I started a new study, and in order, so you and I are both granting charitable intent. Thank you, Richard, for that, because I appreciate it. We're assuming that I actually went through IRB, right? So if I didn't go through IRB, then clearly we have a violation here, and in one, I have failed to do that. So that's just one scenario. But if I have done like Richard says I do, and I've gone through IRB, because I will have then considered the possible negative consequences, because that's on page 1 of the IRB form, right? And then if there's a complaint lodged against me, I suppose the fact that I completed the IRB documents, maybe that automatically indicates that I have carefully considered the possible consequences.
Right, they've adjudicated the matter at the university level. They've said, well, yes, you can start this project. They otherwise would not have said that you can start the project. They would have said, well, Dr. Steele, no, we reject the project on face from beginning because you haven't considered the consequences carefully. At least that's the way that I kind of see it.
Right. So maybe this is written specifically for to make sure that someone has not failed to go through an IRB. Maybe that's the point.
Or for those instances where someone is carrying out research at an institution that is independent from a university and it does not have an IRB.
Yeah, right. Okay. So there may be other questions about this one. The only other thing, as a kind of a child specialist, this talks about consent. If I'm doing research with children, I always get parental consent and child assent. That's not necessarily required by OHRP, but it's considered best practice. If a child is able to give their assent, it's usually verbal, but at least my IRB expects me to get child assent. And so I do wonder about number 3, failing to ascertain that the consent of the participant, and then maybe or the assent of a minor participant is voluntary and informed. it may be worth checking with counsel about that.
Okay, I've made a note on that.
Agree with that. I'm also a child clinical psychologist, and I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Any other comments about research? Okay. Oh. Engaging in improprieties with respect to forensic practice. We have, who's our forensic person? Which shall include the following acts. And we've got 1 through 4. When conducting a forensic examination, failing to inform the examinee of the purpose of the examination and the difference between a forensic examination and a therapeutic relationship. You know, I really wish Rodney were here for this. We've had this conversation before about who, you know, sometimes the question, who is the client, right? And so if I'm doing a forensic evaluation for another agency, like maybe a correctional facility, or in a situation where the person who is engaged in the examination is doing so because of another agency or entity. So failing to inform the examinee of the purpose of the examination and the difference between a forensic examination and a therapeutic relationship. 2, in the course of giving expert testimony in a legal proceeding, performing a psychological assessment in a biased, non-objective, or unfair manner, or without adequate substantiation of the findings. Failing to conduct forensic examinations in conformance with established scientific and professional standards. And 4, if a prior professional relationship with a party to legal proceedings precludes objectivity, failing to report this prior relationship and clarify in both written report and actual testimony the possible impact of this prior relationship on the resulting conclusions and recommendations. And I think that would kind of go back to C, all the way back up at the top. Engaging in a harmful dual relationship. So it's just a very specific kind of harmful dual relationship that's being contemplated in number 4. Thoughts on the forensic examinations?
Number 1, I can't remember. I do remember Rodney talking a lot about that. In the setting that I work in, often we're doing forensic examinations on the patients that we are engaged with on the unit, because we have multiple roles
Sure.
there. And, you know, we do our best to split those up, but we can't always do that. So, yeah, it can get a little muddy. I think I would like to think that all of the people that I do my examinations with can differentiate that, but you know, if I'm, you know, over your treatment planning and I've engaged with you on the unit, you know, multiple days, and then I'm doing your examination, I can see how that can be confused. But I guess with our, when we inform people, when we're doing our forensic evals, typically we have that blurb of informed consent about, you know, who is considered the client, which is typically, in our case, is typically the court, and really explaining to the person that, you know, that evaluation is for the purpose of court. It goes directly to the court. And of course, the attorneys are able to disseminate it as they wish.
Right.
But it does get, and another thing I would say is that typically in my examinations, I let people know, like, it's not just about what we, how I'm evaluating you in the room, but, you know, I do look at different notes and observations from different staff that have, you know, observed you and from the hospital. So, and that might even include my own observations of you throughout our working together in treatment planning, treatment team meetings, you know, that type of thing.
So Tiffany, as you're talking, I'm thinking about number one. So, because it sounds like you're informing the examinee of the purpose of the examination, the difference between the forensic examination and therapeutic relationship. It sounds like you're also informing them of the scope of the assessment procedures.
Yes. Yeah.
So that might be something to think about, some language there for number one.
I think so. Yeah.
Right, because so if I'm your client on that unit, and I think, okay, well, Tiffany's my therapist, but I know she said she's going to use, you know, this particular exam that she's giving me, or this procedure or this interview, and that's going to the court. But I didn't know you were going to tell them what I said on the unit.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So to protect me, the client or patient in that situation, it might be useful to have some language saying that you are going to inform me of kind of the scope of the assessment procedures.
Right.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? David, you've got that comment down there. We can make some sense of that in a little bit. Okay. So the last one is P, engaging in improprieties with respect to supervision, which will include the following 3 acts. 1, failing to provide supervision in compliance with KAR 102-1-5A, which I don't have pulled up. I remember lots of things about that one, but not a lot of specifics. 2, failing to provide supervision to a person working toward licensure as a clinical psychotherapist in compliance with KAR 102-4-7A. And 3, failing to provide regular, periodic, written supervisory feedback to the supervisee. Any thoughts about P?
The regulations that are being referenced, do we know what those allude to?
Yes. I don't have the specifics in my head, and I don't have the printout of that. I don't know if I can get to it electronically right now.
I can,
You can?
sorry, I mean, I can tell you what each regulation is,
Okay,
what
that'd be
it
great.
is.
Yeah.
102-1-5A is the supervision regulations for psychology licensure. It's for both pre and postdoctoral supervision.
Okay.
Okay.
And the LMLP, excuse me. Number 2, 102-4-7A is the postgraduate supervised experience requirements. It's the regulation for a master's level psychology who's doing hours toward a clinical psychotherapist license.
Okay.
And Leslie, there's specific number of hours or frequency of meetings per number of hours of face-to-face
Yes.
contact with those.
Yes.
Right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, so if I were to let my supervisee go for 40 hours of face-to-face contact without meeting with them once, I am in violation of 102-1-5A by
Yes.
quite a bit,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have made it all the way through all of the unprofessional conduct regulations. There's perhaps related is the issue of the what to do if a client calls your office in crisis, and that's kind of under new. I think we have that under new business for tonight, but it may end up being related to unprofessional conduct. Do you want to go out of order and tackle that now? Since
I
we're
think that'd be fine because it does relate to a possible
Yeah.
regulation on professional conduct in that area.
right. So I'll let you know what I know about this. So we're kind of skipping down to 6, new business A, which now reads 988/911 calls. So you all know on July 1st or 17 of this year, 988 went online, right? So now we have a new resource for people in crisis, and so that one went into effect. And so the conversation at the board, as I understand it, had some questions about whether it is unprofessional to not, if someone calls my office in crisis and my answering machine fails to direct them to an appropriate resource, right? So I know many times, you'll get the message, our office is currently closed right now. If you're in crisis, please hang up and dial 911. I don't think we have that in regulation or statute. That's, I think, best practice. But I don't think we have codified it in any way to say that if you fail to do that, it's unprofessional conduct. Does that summarize, David, the discussion?
Yeah, and I think it was also talking about, do you need to have a specific agreement with a provider who will provide after hours care if you have clients who are in crisis? Some of the discussion was if you don't have a specific entity, are your clients going to be appropriately cared for by an entity that is not familiar with them or their individual needs? And would it constitute something like unprofessional conduct if you didn't have proper arrangements for them? And so should the BSRB be considering language specifically on that issue? If so, should there be something added to the existing unprofessional conduct regulations, or is the language currently in the regulations satisfactory on that issue in terms of continuity of care, client abandonment, and things like that?
So I'm looking back. It looks like this would fall under F. If we go back to 102-1-10A, the bullet point, the headline is ignoring client welfare, which shall include the following acts. And that would be under F6, failing to arrange for another psychologist or another appropriately trained mental health professional to be available to handle clinical emergencies if the psychologist anticipates being unavailable for a significant amount of time. Or 7, failing to be available for a timely handling of clinical emergencies after having agreed to provide coverage for another psychologist. Or I can imagine adding an item in there, failing to provide appropriate referral for clinical emergencies, more generally, right? I part of what you said, I'm just thinking off the cuff, right? So no, don't judge me. This is a safe place. If I'm in private practice, and if I don't have a large network of colleagues to refer to, if I'm out in somewhere, right? It's not likely that I'm going to have a colleague who knows you well, right? You, my client, well, right? It may be impossible, right? And so the very best I can do is, if I'm not available, if I'm doing self-care and it's after 7 o'clock and I am not picking up the phone, that I have my answering machine direct you. If you're in crisis, the best thing you can do is 911 or 988, because I may not have a colleague in the county, right?
That was the first thing that I thought about, or something to that effect, when the conversation came up in the wider BSRB meeting, that it would be prohibitively onerous on the psychologist and, for example, private practice in certain contexts to have to establish a relationship or have an established relationship with another psychologist or another mental health professional to refer a client to after hours, so that the client, in the event of an emergency, can have a specific referral source. I think that your example, Rick, of being a psychologist in, say, a remote or rural area, and you're the only person within like a 25-mile radius or something like that, I think that's a really apt example of the issue at hand.
So it seems like there's two things that I need to do if I'm that psychologist out there, wherever there is, right? And one of them is, at the time of that I agree to provide services, notifying the client that I don't do emergency hours, right? I don't do emergency services after hours unless I do, right? If I'm in the DBT center and I know that they do have a call center and they do that. If I'm doing private practice, I may not be doing that. And I need to make sure the client knows at the time that we agree to do services that this is what you do if you're in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's one. And then number two is, if they call my office, that the notification directs them to an appropriate service, right? Are there other thoughts? I don't want to. And are there other places that you can think of in the unprofessional conduct regulation that would be the right place to address this?
I'm not sure if D6, where is that, where it says be available to handle clinical emergencies if the psychologist anticipates being unavailable for a significant amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if maybe if that is added, should it be added there or just a completely different number? I don't know.
I think we could give it a different number, Tiffany, that it would be fine if there was. So that 6 goes all the way up. It's counterintuitive. That 6 goes all the way back up to the F, that's on the previous page. So
Oh, that's right. Okay.
and I don't know why it's an attorney thing. David, explain yourself. I don't know why you attorney people do this, but you do.
Yeah, somebody did it first and then everybody had to follow it.
I know, it's just wrong on so many levels. So little f, lowercase f is ignoring client welfare, which includes the big 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which then has a capital A, B, C, and D, and then the 6 goes back up to ignoring client welfare.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but Tiffany, I can imagine us adding, because that's one thing, right? So if I'm going on that 2-month cruise, which sounds lovely, really, but if I'm going on that 2-month cruise, it's ignoring client welfare for me not to make arrangements for, or if Richard gets to go on that 2-month cruise and I have agreed to handle clinical emergencies for him, then it's also on me because I agreed to take care of Richard's clients while he's gone on that lovely cruise that I would like to go on. Send me a postcard, please. I'm just wondering if there's if we say something like failing to notify client of appropriate emergency services, either at the time services are provided or initiated. I'm not good at writing that kind of stuff.
I think, as I think about my own practice over the years, I've always said, in the event of an emergency, this is what you do in the first session. Because I would not want to be in a situation that we're describing here, where if something happens and they don't know what to do, then it becomes, and then it's like incumbent upon me, or the onus falls back on to me, and people can say, well, why didn't you tell this client what to do? So I think that having something in there that says that if there's a failure to tell the person about the emergency services to which they can avail themselves, that would be an issue.
David, what are some of the other boards? How are they handling this? Or at other, not boards, but other,
The advisory committees?
yes, thank you.
Questions, yeah. I think there's been a good discussion. For the behavior analyst profession, a lot of their conversation has been that the types of clientele that they serve tend to be youth that may not have need of crisis services, I suppose, as much as other individuals by other professions. So they had a discussion about if they needed to make arrangements for after-hours crisis services. And they also discussed that, you wouldn't want providers to not take clients because of needing to have a policy about after-hours crisis services. You would want them to, take clients that need services. And some of the others looked at some of their unprofessional conduct language on some of the professions have some language that talks about failing to provide continuity of care when they're moving. It speaks a little bit more broadly to transferring a client. It's more along the lines of not just cutting off a client relationship abruptly without making sure they had someone else to provide services, but it kind of falls under the same umbrella. It just wasn't exactly on this point. And so,
Right. I thought we had something about that, specifically continuity of. Oh, there's the thing about failing to take each of the following steps before termination. Okay, that's a little different than what you just said, but Well, I would be pleased to see something that indicates failing to notify client of appropriate emergency services at the time. And I get stuck on the language, because then I say at the time that services commence. That's a little confusing. We might need an attorney to write that for us. But then I was also thinking, so again, I like Richard is saying, I want to do this when I start seeing you, first session, maybe even before first session, right? I've agreed to take you on as a client. This is my emergency. These are my hours, and this is what we do if we're in a crisis after hours. And then it seems like what I was hearing about the board's deliberation is, in addition, I want to make sure that there's some way that the client knows that, whether it's on my website or if it's on my answering machine or whatever I'm doing, but I don't know how to write that.
Should there be a shall clause of some, I think what you're saying, Rick, should there be a shall clause of some sort? Like the psychologist shall provide written or verbal notification of their emergency services policy, something to that effect?
I can see it going like, look at E, failing to obtain informed consent, which shall include the following acts. And then there's a few things below it, right? So it could be something, because Richard, I like your, because the shall kind of, that's the serious words. That's when we're pulling out the, right? So failing to notify clients of appropriate emergency services, which shall include the following. And then 1, notifying the clients of appropriate emergency services at the time, I don't know, at the beginning of the therapeutic relationship or whatever, however we would say that. And 2, something about including emergency service referral information on electronic. What if I don't have a website though?
So if it can be electronically, or it can be like their informed consent that they hand out, or their notice of privacy practices, or answering machine, or their voicemail, like something somewhere where it's either written or it's written, it's stated in writing, or it's stated verbally. So it's recorded somewhere by voice so that it can be either heard or seen.
David, how much of this do we have to have actually ironed out? If we just have a recommendation that it's included in here and have some general ideas, or we've got people that write this stuff for us, right? We have people, right?
Well, no.
No, we're the people. Okay.
Well, yeah, and we can continue to have some of the advisory committee meetings, and I can bring back some more ideas from those meetings.
Okay.
The Attorney General's office, they review some of the language after when we submit changes, but
Okay.
most of the drafting is done here at our office. So
All right. Well, sometimes you got to be the people. Sometimes you either have the people or you got to be the people. And we got.
We can throw the spaghetti against the wall,
See what's. Yeah.
and then
Okay.
it's the drafting phase.
That's right.
well, and Rick, one of the goals I think this year was to go through the unprofessional conduct regulations for each of the professions, and you guys have reached the end of yours, and I appreciate all the hard work that you've done. One thing that I'm going to attempt to do for each of the advisory committees is bring back sort of your compiled recommendations or comments to the December meeting. So that way you can take a look at them. And then if you have any further changes, you can make those. And then those recommendations can be provided to the board so that at the start of next year, the board can consider different recommendations from the different professions.
Okay. So yay, we've done our job, folks. Good work. Everyone gets a cupcake sometime this week. Okay. Anything else? Are we good with unprofessionalism?
I think that's great, but I appreciate all your comments and thoughtful discussion, and I made some notes, so I'll just go ahead and summarize those and bring them back with the items from the previous meetings too.
Okay. Very good. So the only thing I see left on our list is follow-up discussion on accreditation standards. And we'll have to figure out if we've got it in us. So last month, 2 months ago,
2 months ago. Yep.
was it 2 months ago? So I did this kind of long dog and pony show about APA and PC SAS, and what I think what I'm going to do is just give you the Cliff Notes version, and a potential direction to go for the future. And you can ask whatever questions you want. That'll be fair, because we're going to try to end this thing in 24 minutes because it's been a long Tuesday, and it's been a long Tuesday. So many of you know, you're familiar with APA accreditation, and that's what our statutes recognize for accreditation, and that's kind of the standard by which programs, by which psychologists training is based, right? So if I didn't come from an APA accredited program, I have to demonstrate that my training is substantially equivalent to what would have been provided in an APA accredited program. All right. The little problem is that the way our regulations are written and how that is outlined in terms of the number of hours of different kinds of courses and the number of experiences is based on APA's previous standards of accreditation, which were called the G&P, the Guidelines and Principles. That was in effect from 1950 something up until 2016 and a half. Okay, 2016 and a half, we switched from the Guidelines and Principles to the Standards of Accreditation. What that allowed programs to do is to cover some requirements that used to be codified as you will have 3 hours of history and systems. You will have 3 hours of credit of ethics. You will have 3 hours of biological foundations of behavior. That's no longer part of accreditation. Currently, under the standards of accreditation, the rules are the program will provide this training somehow and will document it somehow. So every student has to have ethics covered. Not every student has to have a 3-hour course on professional ethics. You're with me so far? The problem is that if a person came from a program, I'm going to just make one up, Bowling Green State, for example, and it's an accredited program, they no longer require a 3-hour course in ethics. Okay, well, Leslie's never going to know that because they're checking the box that says, do you come from an APA accredited program? And they're going to say, yeah, that's fine, right? No harm, no foul, everybody's good. The problem comes in if I'm coming from a program that's not APA accredited, but does the same thing that that other program does, I'm not going to get licensed because I didn't have a 3-hour class in ethics, and there's no way around it. Unless, I know there's no way around it. There shouldn't be any way around it, right? I'm going to take it to a hearing, and I'm going to make people spend 6 or 8 hours on a hearing. But eventually, what's going to happen is they're going to say, no, I'm sorry, you haven't had a 3-hour course in ethics. And the rules say you have to have a 3-hour course in ethics. And so there's this imbalance, right? And where this is going to be a big problem is as programs, training programs move towards the new accreditation system, which is Psychological Clinical Science Accreditation System, PC SAS. They're doing the same thing that APA is doing. But if I come from University of North Carolina and I've decided, yeah, we're dropping APA, we're just going with PCSAS, and then all of a sudden my stuff comes into Leslie and I haven't had an ethics class, but I've had the ethics training that program provides that's consistent with PCSAS and is probably consistent with APA, I can't get licensed. And so then there's going to be this wobble in the system that is going to be an administrative nightmare. And it's going to keep Leslie, it's going to be bad. And Leslie's not going to be happy. And then David's not going to be happy. And there's going to be a backlog of hearings that's going to go from now until the end of time. And so that's kind of where we are. There has been a few states have creatively addressed this. One of them is Texas. And I think we have lost quorum, so we can't make a decision on anything now. But for those of you who have stuck with me, I'm going to finish this little story. Texas has written into their revised regulations a way of addressing this. And can I share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Okay. I'm always never sure about whether that's legal for me or not, but it is apparently. Okay, so what Texas has done, this is their rules and regs. And on this particular page, they've gone through just previously on page 84 and 85, they go through the specific stuff that's required, right? And then below here as well. So scientific and professional ethics, research design, all the stuff, right? But what they have is this great little clause here that says it's recognized that educational institutes vary in their definition of full-time graduate studies. Now that gets at whether you have to be full-time and what that means. That's a whole separate issue that I'm not worried about right now. It is also recognized, oh no, this is residency requirements. There we go. That's what I was trying to get to. It is recognized that some doctoral programs have developed special competency examinations in lieu of requiring students to complete coursework in all core areas. Graduates of such programs who have not completed the necessary semester hours in these core areas must submit to the council evidence of competency in each of the 4 core areas. And so if we had something like this and inserted that in our reg, which is 102- where is it? 12, 102-1-12, right? Yeah. So we would be able to go in here, right? In 13A. So this is where it lists all of the stuff we've got to do. Right? All of those things that we have to check on the little box, right? So if we used what Texas used and has a clause in there, it is recognized that doctoral programs vary, right? And just borrow that language. However we do that, it might get us around that question.
I have a gargantuan curveball to throw in here.
Oh, good. That's what we're doing today. We're doing curveballs today.
I graduated from one of the programs that spearheaded the new accreditation system.
Okay.
I'm from the University of Washington.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I was in graduate school when this whole mess started.
Yeah.
I graduated in 2010. And the University of Washington, its general examination, its comprehensive exam is different from a lot of other places. And so the comprehensive exam kind of serves as the foundational exam that's kind of being referenced here in some ways, or it could, because usually it's the comprehensive exam that does the examination of whether or not you have gained knowledge around these different areas of coursework so that you can be admitted to doctoral candidacy. Well, Unfortunately, the University of Washington, because it's so research driven, the exam is to write a 60-page research review in your topic area and to do your dissertation proposal. Is basically a 100-page paper in your specific area of proposed research. And it does not necessarily have to cover anything else other than what is specific to what it is that you're studying.
Right. Well, but Richard, that you graduated in 2010. That was before the standards of accreditation, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but if you advance that to now,
Yeah.
I am guessing that is still the same way that things are done at UW. And if they are not teaching certain courses and they're kind of combining courses because things have become increasingly lax, even those programs, you probably would run the risk that those programs who will be dropping their APA accreditation, they would still run the risk of not being able to get through to be licensed in a place like Kansas is what I'm getting at.
No, I get it. But what the difference between that competency exam that you did at UW and what they have to do now? So for them to get they're currently still APA accredited. They may have gotten PCSAS accredited also, but under their new accreditation guidelines, they have to demonstrate to the commission, Commission on Accreditation, how, in order to not require, for example, ethics, they have to now demonstrate how they train it and how they assess it, right, differently. So I'm actually not terribly worried because we could look. I mean, we could easily go onto their website and figure out how they're doing their competency assessment that allows them to stay accredited, right?
Also, there is a mechanism, and see what I must have missed that in my reading, because I didn't know that there was a mechanism that showed that said that, if you are not going to teach X, Y, or Z course, you have to demonstrate that it is interwoven in these courses.
Yes.
I think that all I remember seeing is that it could be interwoven in these courses. It didn't I don't think I remember seeing that you had to demonstrate that it was interwoven in these courses.
Yes. So if I didn't include that, then that was on my bad. But no, it is actually a huge headache. And so for me, while I was director of the clinical child program, I just wanted life to be easy, right? So we're just going to have the ethics class. I don't care that we can do it another way. We're going to have an ethics class. But if I had chosen, okay, we're going to do ethics over in my research class and in your neuropsych class, and we're going to cover it in an integrated way, I have to demonstrate to APA exactly how I've taught it and exactly how I've assessed it and exactly how I know that my students are getting it. There's this table, it's table 12, and every training director's nightmare because that's what you do. You do how you train it, how you assess it, and how you know they got it. And so I'm less worried about it. And frankly, I used to be really worried about PCSAS, but then I got into it a little bit more. And it's basically the same thing as APAs now. So I don't know if that alleviates any concern, Richard, and I get it.
That does alleviate concern, because although my big concern had to do with, okay, you can interweave these things and you can say that the course material was taught, and can you say that the material was taught and that there was a demonstrated assessment of the material that has been taught? Like, how are you going to say that there has been an assessment of the material across these courses.
Yeah.
Like, how is it parsed out, and how is it weighed in each course, and how is it assessed in each course?
Right. So, I mean, I don't know what UW does now. I have a great esteem for that program. So I'm sure whatever they're doing is among the better ways of doing it. But I suspect that even if they're doing, the similar to what they used to do, there is now a rubric that they're using to gauge whether your research paper addressed the integration of biological and social. That's actually how a lot of programs are doing it now. Because this is way more detailed than anybody cares about, but you've got these, they call them the discipline specific knowledge areas, right? And so one of the DSK areas is biological foundations, and one social foundations, all the stuff that you see right here. This is DSK, all of that. What they require now, and this is the reason that they're not requiring it in classes, it's because DSK 3 is the integration of biological with social or biological with cognitive. And so that's where a lot of programs like UW and North Carolina and a few other really good ones are, they're letting people do that by showing that they have integrated those two things in their dissertation. But there's a rubric for your dissertation committee to do, and then that rubric is turned into APA so that APA can be assured that you really did the integration of those two things. So
that further alleviates concern for me.
but this is kind of informational because again, we've lost a few people, but I think as far as I can tell, at some point the board is gonna need to address this, and I'm happy to bring it up at the day-long meeting in a couple weeks. Or is that next? That's not next week, is it? When is that?
2 weeks.
No. Yeah,
2 weeks?
it's gonna be on Monday, October 24th.
But I still think, I'm not trying to shove this down anyone's throat, but I think the easiest thing to do is, and I think it's fair, and I think it's reasonable, is to borrow that language from Texas. And no one knows how it galls me to say that, but I grew up in Texas, and I know the good and the bad and the ugly, and but they seem to have kind of. The other thing they added is there's another little line where, in addition to the APA line, they've said APA or PC SAS accredited or the equivalent. So I think there's a lot that can be done with just adding a couple of clauses for now, but I guess that's just a regulation change. Is there a statutory change that has to happen too then? No,
Just the regulation.
that's good. Because I can see that being a big old fight Okay, well, I tried to keep that short. If there's other questions or concerns, then I'm happy to try to field those. Well, there's not a lot else on the agenda.
Nope. The next meeting is on the calendar for Tuesday, December 13th at 6 p.m.
So we've talked about some of the other boards or not boards. Why can't I? It's because it's a very long day. Words are escaping me. Some of the other advisory committees have moved to different models, so it's not necessarily every other month. I think we can think about that in December But I really would like for us to meet in December. David, does that give you enough time to kind of get some notes together for us on the unprofessional conduct changes, possible recommendations, and just that'll kind of be the big item maybe for December, and we can get those finished up and then packaged up and make specific recommendations to the board for next year. Does that seem
That seems good for December. Yeah.
okay? That I'd like to do that if that's okay with everybody, and then we can say that we finished the cycle. It's taken us it's taken pretty much the whole year, hasn't it? Because it's okay.
Yep.
Okay. And I don't know, David, if I don't want to leave that burden just to you. If there's a way that I can help with that, let me know, because that's a lot of notes.
Okay. And some of them are in the minutes from the past meetings.
That's true. That's true.
Take a lot of those comments and kind of put them together with a little more context. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Unless there is no other business that people want to cover, it would be lovely to, well, actually, we're now down to 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5. So we don't have a quorum anymore.
Right. 6 would be a quorum. So you don't have quorum to take any official action. So
We can't adjourn. We're stuck on here all night. We just have to stay here until our computers die.
the meeting can just be considered adjourned, but you can't actually take a motion to do it. So.
All right. Okay. Well, then I bid you all a good evening, and I'm going to go take care of my puppy dogs.
All right.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night.